Ever had that moment when your computer starts acting, well, just weird?
Oh, yeah. Like maybe a program pops up you don't remember installing.
Exactly. Or things just feel sluggish and you can't figure out why. It really makes you wonder what's going on behind the scenes.
Definitely. And that feeling that something's not quite right. That's often the first clue.
So today we're diving deep into this stuff. We're talking potentially unwanted programs, but also, the more serious malicious software.
Right, we're going to unpack what these terms actually mean, look at the key differences.
And this is all based on some really solid cybersecurity learning materials, Lesson 13 specifically. It's designed to build a good foundation.
Think of it as uh, helping you navigate this landscape. We'll try to cut through the jargon and focus on what really matters, the practical side.
Perfect. So let's start with something maybe less destructive, but still annoying. Potentially unwanted programs. PUPs. What are we actually talking about here?
Okay, PUP. So essentially, this is software that often kind of piggybacks onto your system.
Piggybacks. Like when you install something else.
Exactly. You install something you want, and boom, this extra thing comes along for the ride.
Oh.
Or sometimes it's even pre-installed on a new computer.
Ah, the pre-installed stuff. Right. I think I've had other names for that too. Bloatware.
Yeah, bloatware is a common one. Also, grayware. It captures that gray area.
Gray area how?
Well, it's not usually outright malicious like a virus, but it's not something you actually asked for, and it might slow things down or show annoying ads. It's unwanted.
Okay, so mostly an annoyance, maybe some performance hit. Got it. Now, let's move into the territory of stuff that's actively trying to cause harm. Malware. That sounds like a big category.
Oh, it is. It's a huge umbrella term. Basically, any software designed with bad intentions falls under malware.
And there are different types within that.
Lots of types.
Yeah.
And knowing the difference is pretty key. Should we start with Trojans?
Trojans. Okay, like the horse, right? Something looks legit, but isn't.
Precisely. It often hides inside something that seems harmless, like a software installer you downloaded.
So you think you're installing, I don't know, a game utility.
Right. And there's this term, Trojan virus, which specifically means malware tucked inside a file that looks okay. You run the file.
And bang, the Trojan gets unleashed and infects your system. Deceptive.
Very classic social engineering almost.
Okay, sneaky. What about the old school threats, like viruses and worms? Are they still around?
Oh, absolutely. They were some of the first kinds of malware, really. And their defining feature is spreading without you necessarily doing anything specific, like clicking yes.
How do they manage that?
They often embed themselves in the executable code of other programs, or in the case of worms, they can self-propagate across networks.
And I vaguely remember hearing about viruses that could, like, change themselves
Oh,
to avoid detection.
that's right. Those are called polymorphic viruses. They alter their code or try to make it look different each time they copy themselves.
Which makes it harder for antivirus software.
Exactly. Antivirus often looks for known signatures, known patterns. Polymorphism tries to constantly change that pattern.
Clever, in a bad way. And you mentioned boot viruses, too.
Yes, and those are nasty. They infect the actual boot sector of your hard drive or the partition table.
So the very first thing the computer reads when it starts up.
Pretty much. Which means the virus runs every single time you turn on your machine before the OS even fully loads.
Wow. That sounds incredibly difficult to deal with.
It could be very persistent. Then you also have script viruses.
Script viruses. How do they work?
They use the scripting features built into your operating system, or maybe your web browser. Think JavaScript or VBScript. Unlike polymorphic ones, their actual code doesn't usually change.
Okay, so they exploit existing scripting tools. Got it. So we've got Trojans, viruses, worms. Oh, what about things focused more on stealing information, like keyloggers?
Keyloggers. Often overlooked,
Hmm.
maybe, but our source material really flags them as a major cause of compromised accounts.
Because they just record everything you type.
Everything. Every keystroke, passwords, credit card numbers, private messages, search queries, all captured.
And sent off to the attacker, I assume?
Usually, yeah, without you having any idea it's happening.
That's genuinely chilling. What about backdoor viruses? The names sound self-explanatory, but what's their main purpose?
It is a good name, but they're not typically used for grabbing your login details initially.
Oh, so what are they for?
Think of it like this. An attacker gets in once, maybe through some other vulnerability. They then install a backdoor.
To make sure they can get back in later.
Exactly. Even if the original way they got in gets fixed, the backdoor provides a persistent hidden entry point for them. It's about maintaining access.
Leaving a key under the digital doormat. Right. Okay, botnets. We hear that term a lot. What's the deal there?
So a botnet is basically a network of infected computers, could be hundreds, thousands, even millions.
Infected with what?
Some kind of malware that lets a central hacker control them all remotely. These compromised machines are the bots.
And what do they use this army of bots for?
According to our source, the #1 use is distributed denial of service attacks, DDoS.
Ah, overwhelming websites or servers with traffic.
Precisely. Flooding a target from so many different directions that it just collapses under the load. It's often more about disruption than stealing data directly from those bots.
Got it. Okay, moving on to something that feels even more direct. Ransomware. That's the one that locks up your files.
Right. That's the one. It infects your system, and then, boom, a message appears demanding money. A ransom.
To get your files back. Or to stop them from doing something worse.
It varies. Sometimes it's to prevent deletion, sometimes to stop them publishing sensitive data. But the most common type now is crypto ransomware.
Crypto ransomware.
Yeah, that specifically encrypts your files, documents, photos, everything, making them totally unusable.
And the ransom is for the decryption key.
Exactly. Pay up, and maybe you get the key to unlock your files. It's digital extortion, pure and simple, often with a lot of pressure tactics involved.
Sounds terrifying. What about logic bombs? The name is evocative.
It is, isn't it? A logic bomb is malware that just sits there, dormant.
Waiting for something.
Exactly. Waiting for a specific trigger. It could be a certain date, or maybe a specific event occurring on the system.
Like what kind of event?
The source gives a classic example.
Mm-hmm.
Maybe it's set to go off if a particular user account, like a disgruntled employee's, gets deleted.
Wow! So it's like a pre-planted time bomb or tripwire? That's devious.
It highlights the insider threat potential, definitely. Malice that activates later.
Okay. And cryptojacking. Is that related to ransomware?
Not directly related to locking files, no. Cryptojacking malware is often used within those botnets we talked about.
How so?
It secretly uses the processing power of all those infected computers.
To do what? Mine cryptocurrency.
Exactly. Like Bitcoin or Monero. The attacker harnesses all that collective computing power to run the complex calculations needed for mining, generating cryptocurrency for themselves.
All using the victim's electricity and processing power without them knowing.
Pretty much. It's resource theft on a potentially massive scale.
Super sneaky. Okay, last one in this malware list. Rootkits.
They sound deep. They are. Rootkits are designed to gain the highest level of access on a system. We're talking system or root privileges.
Like administrator level control. Or even higher.
Often even higher.
Yeah.
Full control over the operating system, files, processes, everything.
And what makes them particularly nasty?
Their main goal, besides having that deep access, is to hide themselves. They actively work to conceal their presence, modifying the OS itself sometimes, making them incredibly hard to detect and remove.
So ultimate power plus ultimate stealth. And you mentioned earlier a Trojan could potentially become a rootkit.
Right. Our source mentions this possibility. If a Trojan manages to exploit a vulnerability to gain those system-level privileges.
It can then start acting like a rootkit, embedding itself deeply.
Exactly. It could then deploy rootkit techniques to hide itself and maintain that high-level access. It shows how these categories aren't always completely rigid. Malware evolves.
Okay, so to recap that section, malware is the big category.
Right. Viruses, worms, Trojans, ransomware, rootkits, keyloggers, botnet agents. They're all types of malware.
Different methods, different goals, but all malicious software.
Precisely. Knowing the type helps figure out the defense.
Okay, let's shift from the software itself to the attacks they enable. We mentioned DDoS with botnets. What about just a regular DOS, denial of service?
Good question. A standard DOS attack is simpler in concept. It's usually one attacking machine trying to flood a target server.
Just overwhelming it with requests.
Yeah. Sending so much traffic or so many connection requests that the server gets bogged down and can't respond to legitimate users anymore.
So DDoS is just DOS but distributed from many sources at once.
Exactly. That's why botnets are so effective for DDoS. Instead of one attacker, you have potentially thousands, all hitting the target simultaneously. Much harder to block.
Makes sense. Scale matters. Now, the source material mentions TTPs. Sounds like military jargon.
It does a bit. It stands for Tactics, Techniques, and Procedures. It's a framework used in cybersecurity to understand how attackers operate.
Okay, break that down. What's a tactic?
The tactic is the high-level goal. What is the attacker trying to achieve strategically? Examples are things like reconnaissance, just gathering info, or persistence, trying to maintain access over time.
So the big picture objective. Then what's a technique?
A technique is how they achieve that tactic. It's more specific. So for the reconnaissance tactic, a technique might be active scanning, probing the network for open ports.
Okay, the method used to reach the goal and procedures.
Procedures are the nitty-gritty details. Exactly how is that technique implemented? So for active scanning, a procedure might be using a specific tool like Nmap with certain command flags.
Gotcha. Tactic. Why? Technique, what, how? General. Procedure. Why is this TTP framework useful?
It helps defenders move beyond just reacting. By understanding the attacker's likely TTPs, you can anticipate their moves and build more proactive defenses that target their methods, not just the specific tools they happen to use today.
Thinking like the attacker. Okay, now shifting gears, slightly physical attacks. Easy to forget about those when we're focused on code.
Very true, but critical. The source mentions brute force physical attacks,
Which means?
literally attacking the physical stuff. Forcing entry into a building or data center, damaging servers or network gear, cutting cables, maybe messing with the air conditioning to make things overheat.
Right, physical security impacting digital operations. Then we have network-based attacks. What defines those?
Simply that the attack happens over a network connection. The attacker doesn't need physical access to the target hardware. They could be anywhere in the world.
Which is most cyber attacks we think of, right?
Mostly, yes. It leverages connectivity. Then there are offline attacks.
Offline. How does that work? What are they attacking?
Typically, this refers to attacks where the attacker has already gotten their hands on something like a database of stolen password hashes.
Ah, the encrypted passwords.
Exactly. The offline part means they take that database away and try to crack the hashes on their own powerful computers without interacting with the live system anymore.
So they're not trying to log in repeatedly online, which might trigger alarms?
Right. They can take their time, use massive computing power, try different techniques to break those hashes and recover the original passwords.
Okay, methodical. Speaking of breaking passwords, the source lists a few cracking methods. Password spraying, what's that?
Password spraying is kind of clever. It's done online, usually. Instead of hitting one account with tons of password guesses.
Which would lock the account out, probably.
Right. Instead, they take one or a few really common passwords like password 123 or spring 2024 and try them against many different user accounts.
Hoping someone used a weak, common password.
Exactly. It's a horizontal approach. Low and slow, trying to avoid detection.
Contrasted with a traditional brute force attack for passwords.
A brute force password attack is just trying every single possible combination.
Yes,
and bad.
Until it finds a match for the hash.
Yep. Can take a long time. Needs a lot of computing power, but if the password isn't complex enough, it will eventually find it. Usually done offline against stolen hashes.
Makes sense. And dictionary attacks.
That's using a pre-made list. A dictionary of likely words, phrases, common passwords, maybe names, dates, things found in previous breaches.
So guessing intelligently based on common patterns rather than every single combination.
Exactly. Much faster than pure brute force if the password is in the dictionary.
Okay, let's switch to something a bit more technical. DNS attacks. Domain name system stuff. I've heard of DNS poisoning.
Right. DNS poisoning is a big one, but there are nuances. First, there's DNS client cache poisoning.
Client cache, so on my own computer.
Yes. An attacker somehow modifies the local host file on your machine. That file lets you manually map domain names like google.com to specific IP addresses.
So they could make mybank.com point to their fake site just on my machine.
Precisely. Your computer checks that local file first before asking the real DNS servers. It poisons your local lookup.
Nasty. How is that different from general DNS poisoning?
General DNS poisoning targets the actual DNS servers out on the internet, or maybe your company's internal DNS servers.
The ones that serve lookup information to lots of people.
Right. The attacker manages to corrupt the records on the server, so anyone using that server gets sent to the wrong malicious IP address when they try to visit a specific domain. Much wider impact.
Okay, server level versus client level. What about a DNS based on path attack?
This one's often done on a local network like public Wi-Fi. The attacker gets between you and the legitimate DNS server.
How?
Often using something called ARP tracing on the local network. It tricks your computer into sending its DNS request to the attacker's machine instead of the real gateway or DNS server.
And then the attacker gives a fake reply.
Exactly. They intercept your query and send back a malicious IP address. It's like a man-in-the-middle attack, specifically for DNS lookups on your local network.
Tricky stuff. The source also mentions DNS attack indicators. What are those?
These are clues you might find in DNS server logs or network traffic that suggest an attack is happening.
Like what sort of clues?
Maybe a huge spike in requests for one domain or requests coming from weird places or lots of failed lookups. Analyzing these patterns helps detect ongoing attacks.
Okay, watching the DNS traffic for anomalies. Let's pivot now to wireless attacks. Seems like a huge area with Wi-Fi everywhere.
Definitely a major attack surface. A classic one is the rogue access point, or rogue AP.
That's someone setting up a fake Wi-Fi hotspot.
Yep. They set up an AP, maybe give it a name that sounds legitimate, like free coffee shop Wi-Fi, or even copy the name of the real network.
To trick people into connecting.
Exactly. If you connect, all your traffic goes through the attacker's device. They can try to capture logins, redirect you to fake sites. It's an easy way to intercept traffic if people aren't careful.
Like digital eavesdropping? What about a wireless denial of service, just jamming the signal?
Jamming is one way, but the source specifically mentions using a powerful rogue AP.
How does that cause denial of service?
If the rogue AP broadcasts the same network name SSID as the legitimate one, but with a much stronger signal, users' devices might preferentially try to connect to it, or just get confused. It can effectively block access to the real network nearby.
Overpowering the legitimate signal. Got it. Wireless replay attack. What are they replaying?
They capture the data exchanged when you first connect to a Wi-Fi network, the authentication handshake.
The initial digital greeting and key exchange.
Sort of, yeah.
Yeah.
They capture that encrypted exchange. Then they take that captured data offline and try to crack the Wi-Fi password using brute force or dictionary attacks against the captured handshake.
So it doesn't immediately break the connection, but lets them try to figure out the password later.
Exactly. Our source notes it's about offline cracking for future access, not disrupting the current session.
Okay. And lastly here, a downgrade attack in a wireless context.
This is where the attacker tries to trick your device and the access point into using an older, weaker form of Wi-Fi encryption.
Like forcing it to use WEP instead of the stronger WPA2 or WPA3.
Precisely. WEP has known vulnerabilities. If they can force a downgrade, the connection becomes much easier for them to eavesdrop on or crack.
But it doesn't necessarily stop you from connecting.
No, the source points out it's about weakening the security, not directly denying access like the powerful rogue AP method.
Okay, fascinating range of wireless threats. Now, the source material had this interesting scenario based on a question from an intern. Let's talk about that.
Right. The scenario was an intern notices consistent outbound data transfers, several megabytes every day around the same time. Been happening for weeks. What could it be?
And the source suggested a couple of likely culprits. First one, reconnaissance. How does that fit the pattern?
Well, reconnaissance involves scanning, probing the network, gathering information. That gathered info network maps, vulnerability list has to be sent out to the attacker.
And that could be several megabytes.
Depending on the network size and scan depth, absolutely. And doing it regularly, sending the results back daily at a set time, that fits a pattern of automated reconnaissance.
Like a daily report being sent to the attacker.
Okay.
What was the other strong possibility?
Unauthorized data exfiltration. Straight up data theft.
Why does the pattern suggest that?
Again, it's the consistency and the volume. Several megabytes, same time every day. That smells like an automated script grabbing data, maybe customer lists, financial info, source code, and uploading it somewhere.
A scheduled data leak. Makes sense. The source also ruled out a couple things, right? Like DOS.
Yeah, denial of service doesn't really fit. DOS is about disruption, not typically about sending chunks of data out on a regular schedule.
And it also said it's probably not just a regular teleworker.
Right. While teleworkers obviously transfer data, several megabytes, same exact time every single day, is pretty unusual for normal remote work. Teleworker traffic tends to be more variable.
Good points. Okay, another scenario. What happens if a web server inside a network gets compromised? What are the risks?
Oh, that's a serious foothold for an attacker.
Yeah.
Gaining control of a web server inside the network perimeter is a major win for them.
What can they do from there?
Lots of things. They control the server itself, so they could steal any data stored on that server directly.
Okay, data theft. What else?
They could use it as a launch pad. Maybe plant malware there. Use it to attack other machines deeper inside the network lateral movement.
So use it as a base to explore further.
Exactly. It could also be used as a command and control point to manage other compromised machines or to send stolen data out. It's a beachhead.
But it doesn't automatically mean they own the whole network.
No, not
Yeah.
necessarily. Gaining admin rights on one web server doesn't instantly grant domain admin privileges network-wide, but it's a very dangerous starting point.
Okay, a critical foothold. Let's switch to attacks focused on user sessions. Our source mentioned replay attacks. How would you spot that in logs?
A replay attack is about capturing a valid session token, the thing that keeps you logged in and reusing it.
So stealing your temporary logged in pass.
Right. In the logs, a big clue might be seeing a user session suddenly end and then immediately restart.
Like disconnect, reconnect instantly.
Yeah, maybe from a different IP address or at a weird time. That abrupt end and restart pattern can indicate someone else reusing a captured token.
Definitely suspicious. What about cross-site scripting? XSS, how does that mess with sessions?
XSS happens when an attacker injects malicious script, usually JavaScript, into a website and your browser runs it.
Okay. And how does that affect my session?
That malicious script can be designed to steal your session cookie, the little file in your browser holding that session token.
Ah, so the script running in my browser sends my session key to the attacker.
Exactly. Then the attacker can use that cookie to hijack your session, impersonate you. XSS can also sometimes be used to try and predict future session tokens, potentially.
Wow. Stealing the key, maybe figuring out the lock pattern too? What about a forgery attack on a session? Does that look like a replay in the logs?
Usually not. Forgery is more about messing with an active, ongoing session, trying to perform actions you didn't authorize by manipulating requests within that live session.
So less about starting a new session with a stolen token, more about injecting commands into the current one.
Kind of, yeah. You probably wouldn't see that disconnect-reconnect pattern. You might see weird actions happening within a session that looks otherwise normal.
And injection attacks in general, within a session context.
Injection attacks focus on exploiting how the web application handles data you send it. While they can lead to unauthorized actions within your session, they don't typically cause that replay attack signature of disconnect either. It's more about tricking the application logic.
Okay, subtle differences. So what should you look for in logs like URLs or server logs to catch these kinds of attacks?
URLs themselves can sometimes contain session IDs or show weird characters suggesting manipulation attempts. Definitely worth analyzing unusual URLs.
And server logs.
Web server logs are crucial. Look for errors related to session handling, strange sequences of requests, requests with unexpected parameters, maybe POST requests with suspicious data, accesses from unusual IPs within a session. Error logs can be particularly revealing.
So digging into the details of the web traffic, the source also cautioned against relying only on finding, say, buffer overflow attempts, or just looking at session cookies themselves.
Right. Buffer overflows are a different class of vulnerability targeting memory. They wouldn't necessarily log things related to session hijacking directly, and session cookies are just data. They don't log attacks against them.
So you need the broader picture.
Exactly. You need to correlate web server logs, application logs, maybe firewall or intrusion detection logs to really piece together what happened during a session attack. It requires context.
Makes sense. Okay, let's quickly touch on some other specific attack types mentioned. General injection attacks, what's the core idea again?
Exploiting any place where an application takes input from a user from another system and doesn't handle it safely. The attacker tries to inject malicious code or commands into that input stream, hoping the application will execute it.
Like SQL injection or command injection?
Those are prime examples, yeah. Aiming for data theft or server control usually.
And forgery attacks, more generally. Beyond sessions.
It's about faking legitimacy. Making a malicious request look like it came from a trusted user or system. Could be manipulating data, faking headers, exploiting trust relationships.
Impersonation, essentially. And replay attacks, generally.
Just reusing captured data. Could be a session token, could be an authentication attempt, could be any valid network transaction that an attacker captures and sends again later for malicious effect.
Got it. Cross-site scripting, XSS, generally beyond sessions, what's the main risk?
It's about getting the victim's browser to run the attacker's script. That script can do a lot encrypt, steal credentials entered into forms, redirect the browser, deface the site for that user, maybe try to exploit browser vulnerabilities.
Okay. Directory traversal. Sounds like trying to browse around the server's file.
That's exactly it. Using things like in-file path inputs to try and navigate outside the allowed web root directory.
To read sensitive files, like configuration files or system files.
Yep. If the server isn't configured securely, they might be able to read things they absolutely shouldn't, which could lead to further compromise or privilege escalation.
Okay. Canonicalization attacks. That word's a mouthful.
Huh, it is. It's about finding different ways to represent the same file path or command to bypass security filters.
How so? Like encoding characters differently.
Exactly. Using different character encodings, using extra slashes, things like that.
I
If the security filter only blocks one specific pattern, like Angerist, but doesn't recognize an encoded version like cre2e% to pre2f, the attacker might slip through. It's about bypassing naive filters.
Clever trickery. Command injection attacks. Sounds serious.
Very serious. This is specifically trying to trick the application into running operating system commands directly on the server.
Like making the web server run ARM-ERRF or something.
Potentially, yes. Or commands to download malware, add users, connect back to the attacker. If successful, it often means complete server compromise.
Wow, okay, then server-side attacks generally.
That's a broad term for any attack targeting vulnerabilities in the server software or the server-side application logic itself, rather than attacking the client or user.
So exploiting flaws in how the server processes things.
Right. Making the server do bad things it wasn't supposed to.
And finally, application attacks. How's that different?
It's similar, maybe a bit more specific, targeting known or unknown weaknesses, like 0 days, in the specific applications running on the web server software itself, like Apache or Jinx, the database software, content management systems, any installed programs.
Phew, we have definitely covered a lot of ground today. Really navigated through that whole complex world.
We really have, from those PUPs, which seem almost harmless but are still annoying,
Right, the grayware.
all the way to ransomware,
Yeah.
which is just devastating, and then all these really intricate attack methods we just discussed.
Yeah.
Understanding the differences feels pretty crucial.
It really is. And think about some of those subtleties, like how a keylogger just sits there silently stealing info.
Yeah, or how that compromised web server we talked about isn't the end game, but
Right.
it's that critical first step for an attacker moving deeper. Exactly. And that intern scenario, the
Yeah.
consistent data going out, it just highlights how important it is to watch for those unusual patterns. Vigilance is key.
Absolutely. And hopefully this deep dive gives you, our listener, a better handle on these threats. It's not just tech jargon. Knowing this stuff helps you understand security news, company policies, maybe even spot something suspicious yourself.
Being aware, recognizing the signs, even the small ones, can make a real difference.
It really can. So thinking about all this, the polymorphic viruses, the TTPs, the way attackers keep finding new angles, it makes you wonder, doesn't it?
What's next?
Yeah, with threats evolving so fast, what kind of new methods are attackers dreaming up right now? And more importantly, how do we stay ahead? How do we keep protecting our digital lives, our systems, our data against whatever comes next?
That's the ongoing challenge, isn't it? Constant learning, constant adaptation, food for thought.